really speaks to the reasons why we enter these places in the first place. Are we going in to handle a specific threat? Are we going in for some sort of strategic purpose? Are we going in our own interest? Are we being honest about that? All of these questions need to be answered prior to even making the decision to move. Once we do, we need to know whether or not later occupation is something that isn't even a necessary force to be dealt with. And I think that this idea that every time you become involved overseas, you must necessarily have some remnant force is ludicrous. And it's as we mentioned before, and I think we always are going to go back to this, there should be no divergence between domestic and foreign policies in the way that in which you treat people. States are people. Groups are people. There can be no group without individuals to comprise it. So when you are treating people domestically in such a way that you are getting governmental nepotism, you are getting the helping of some at the expense of others. That's how we treat people overseas too. That's how we treat our foreign policy as well. We help some at the expense of others. And that is not in any sense okay. But it's how we operate here and it's how we operate there. And I think that we have a much bigger issue than simple foreign occupation here. I think we have a much bigger issue, and that is actually interrogating every single aspect of our foreign policy and saying, you know what? We have been hypocritical. We have done things that are absolutely not okay. And that fact cannot change. What can change is how we act moving forward. And that's where we are right now. And we are in a position where we can make that decision right now. We are not stuck in any situation right now that we cannot foresee a good, proper way to handle either getting out of it, handling it effectively, however it is that we decide is the best possible way to make use of our time, make use of our resources, get in, get out, get going, whatever the case is. We need to make a decision. And Jim, you always go back to saying that we need to figure out where we stand. We need to figure out who it is that we support. We need to figure out what it is that we support. Why do we support what we support? We need to be consistent. Absolutely. And it's on a case-by-case basis, yes. But that because that's given the variables that are potentially present. But underlying all of that, underlying those case-by-case decisions, is a very fundamental, basic, and concretized theory of rights. And that is what we lack. And that is why we find ourselves running around like chickens with our heads cut off in the global system. And I think that until we are able to stand up and say, no, you know what? We actually can figure this out. We actually can know right from wrong. We're never going to get past that. We're never going to get past that, and we are either going to stagnate or we are going to fall back. We are not going to move forward until we actually assert that we can know that.
And one of the things that we always talk about and say, and it's a major mantra for us, is that every political system in the world is based on some theory of ethics. It's a theory of what people determine to be right and wrong that gives rise to the type of political system that they have. And in this country, that's fundamentally changed from what it was supposed to be during our founding. And given that, I think that there have been certain isolated international examples of things that we've done that absolutely are coincident with a proper theory of ethics. And taking it out of historical context, what happened in Kuwait in 1991 is kind of an interesting example, because it was obviously in our interest to secure, sort of remove Saddam Hussein. It was in everyone's interest, really, to remove Saddam Hussein from Kuwait, just if not to preserve stability in the region and the oil flowing from there. It's interesting to find out that what people usually see as a war of huge expense and loss of money in this country, we were actually reimbursed by Kuwait for that war, and we actually made money. Not that we're the world's mercenary force or anything, but it was a sanctioned war, and that's my view of military involvement in foreign countries. If it's really in our interest, why don't we trade countries, give them something of value to allow us to have a military presence there, And if the government really was constrained by operating on things that the people of this country actually value, then we would only be represented in countries where it was shown to the people that we have an interest in being there, and it would be done not coercively to those countries. We wouldn't say, no, now we're having military bases here and you can't do anything about it. It would be countries that allow us to have military bases there because we're trading them, we offer them some form of security, and that sort of thing. Other than that, there can be no justifiable reason. We can't force ourselves into countries just to have a military presence there. That's not in anyone's interest. But there are certain types of ways that it can be done, and I think it is in our interest to have some forward operating bases in some places in the world. I don't think that we should be completely isolationist, but I don't think that it needs to be as hugely overrepresented as it is now. And I'm pretty sure that if you were to ask people that are involved in the making of these plans, they couldn't even tell you like what the purpose of some of these troops in these remote locations are. They're just there.
Well, you mentioned Kuwait. It's I think one of the most non-discussed topics is our allies in the region. Let's just stick to the Persian Gulf for an example. It's easy to pick on the evils of Saddam Hussein. What is never discussed, by the way, is that he committed most of his crimes while he was on our payroll. But just keeping to Kuwait and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, you have a situation in Bahrain where they have a population there of about 1.2 million. Half of that population is foreign workers, people from Bangladesh, people from Thailand, people from Pakistan. That's who does the work there. Meanwhile, they have 15% unemployment. So they bring in this horribly cheap, practically slave foreign labor. They still have 15% unemployment there. Saudi Arabia, who got zero mention in Obama's speech the other day. Osama bin Laden is from Saudi Arabia. 15 of the 19 hijackers are from Saudi Arabia on 9/11. 90% of all mosques and radical madrasas in the world are financed by the Saudi Arabians. Not one mention. That is our deepest relationship in the region. The number one source of jihadi terror in the world is deeply involved and economically in bed with the United States. They just signed a $60 billion deal on more weapons to Saudi Arabia. Not one mention. This is probably the grandest example of us either defining our values or not, is the source of world Islamic terror is Saudi Arabia, and yet they are our best friends in the region. I think that needs to be addressed, and it got zero mention in Obama's speech, and you would be hard-pressed to find anything in the American media absolutely denouncing and questioning our relationship with Saudi Arabia.
And that's why you tune into the show, because you didn't know facts like that. I knew facts like that because I took media and terrorism. You should too. We'll be right back.